I do not speak any public speech. So
so well. Yeah.
And then
The great thing about being in a place like Lawrence, and when it comes to modernism, much of it is unrecognizable. It's very hidden. Look at this house. You can drive up and down Highland, and you would never expect from the exterior of this house, from that back door is the front door. It's like the back door actually is to the front, and here is the house that is hidden behind that. So we think that we have numerous houses that we don't know about. And so always remember that we begin, and we probably end, with relative ignorance about what we actually have in our own city. And so this was one that certainly I didn't know about.
Yes.
I drove by this at least 35 years, and Tom said, yes, this is the one we have to go in. I stand back there and I look at it, I think, I never would have guessed what we have on the inside. And that inside is really intriguing the minute you walk in the house. Of course, you come in this sort of back door, mostly garage kind of situation, and you walk in front of these long set of windows out here, which is sort of typical of what we've seen in Bob Hess's houses before. That is, you enter alongside a series of windows behind which is the kitchen, and you're walking actually by the kitchen, and you walk up a porch, which is exactly like Haji Brick's house, which is also a Bob Hess house, and we've had a party there once. But it looks like it's a kind of hidden front door. This looks like a back door. When you walk in, I think it's extraordinary what's happening right here. People are using to sit on. It's such a tightly composed transfer of space where you are in a very tight way going either the kitchen, downstairs, upstairs, or to the living room. All right here. And so it seems to me at least that the architect has spared a lot of room that otherwise would be used for walking. Yeah. He's put all of the stairs right here in this core. He uses as an entryway as well, and the exit here out this door, I guess that's the only one. There's one back there too. It's all right here. And I think it's a really powerful statement because it's right in the transition between this space and this form and that. It also separates out really nicely the bedrooms and bathroom areas that are more private with the more public areas here of the kitchen, living room, and dining room. I also just watching people use this, about 35 or so people use this, I noticed then this great modern flow of space. I mean, we just kept kind of circling around and through, and I thought, well, how many people are actually here in a relatively small house? This is about 1,700 square feet, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think
that's
less.
right. Yeah, that's a fairly small house, but we have a lot of people who are sitting and talking quite comfortably here. So I really like the circulation composition here when I walk in the house, the flow of space around this not central chimney. You know, that would be very typical. You don't put it in the center, you put it off so that you create this kind of modern dynamic, this asymmetrical dynamic that makes this thing flow. The components that work here for me so well is that chimney, which is very typical, and this circulation space, and then the flow around it. But then, of course, you begin to look at the feel of it, and that comes through the tremendous wood that you see all over. We've been talking about this paneling, whether it's teak or mahogany. Some people say teak, some people say mahogany. I don't know what it is, but this is a wonderful system for the insides of walls, because once it's up, it's there forever. What are you going to do besides dust it? You know, if you were really meticulous, perhaps you would oil it, but how? So I don't think so. Once you begin to see the houses of this architect, you can see that when things work for him, he uses them over and over again. I think about Bob Hess too, about 1956, because he had just left for California in 1955, where he did the rest of his practice, and he was about 5 years out of school. He graduated in 1950. He went to school under people like George Beale, who's on the site, Werner Smith, who we mentioned, and Tom Garrity, both who taught design and building technology, really careful, probably taught him how to do those drawings. People like Jack Morley, who's also on the site, would have been there as well during that time. And KU was a kind of pool of modern ideas that came with the help of Frank Lloyd Wright, who was often here on his way to Taliesin West. He was very good friends with George Beale, who became chair of the department in '46 and was from '46 to '62 chair of the department. It was an early modern school. Also, Joe Kellogg was there, so-called Little Joe Kellogg. He was a little guy like this, and he was a wonderful watercolorist. And he probably would have been one of the design professors of Mr. Hess. He certainly was, also of Warren Heilman. So he had a rich architectural education, and I think those drawings suggest his ability to understand residential scale architecture very well, to do it fairly cheaply. If you look at those drawings and you look at the details of this building, this was still an architect who could build for builders and they could follow it and carry it out, because these architects still knew how to put things together to a certain extent, because they did that every bit by hand, right? Not just this flashy computer that you can draw parts out of the cloud or out of some sort of atmosphere. You know, you have to invent those things. So I'm really impressed with that. Obviously, another thing that is occurring here that makes this such a warm and rich and inviting place is the wonderful light that comes in from many different directions. And you've pointed out the experiences of having the moon and the sun and coming in at different directions. You know, if you look at it, this is really oriented toward the southeast. You know, this sort of ignored back here. And these lights here on the north bring in a great light into the dining room, but basically everything is looking this direction. All the bedrooms downstairs, they all look here. So does this. Very big window spaces. So if you think about light and space and materials, and also just talking to people here, and what came up was that how well we could hear each other. You know, I'm getting to that place now which I think, can't be that much wax in my ear, you know, there's something wrong. And I often, in a group like this, I can't really hear because there's too much acoustical dissonance. But it seems to me that acoustically this worked very well. You're hearing me. I'm not yelling or anything, but in little groups of people I could talk to them and I heard them, and we looked up and said, oh yes, look at the acoustical paneling. And then I think it was Jonathan who said yes, and also the way in which these beams come across break up those echoing effects and make it easier to hear, so you have in both directions. And you can imagine that with all this hard surface you would need some sort of acoustical a suction cup, so to speak, to take away a lot of the ricochets of the acoustical echoes. So I see here a really nice, small house designed by a young architect. He had done by then about 14 houses in town. He started his first house even for his parents, before he even graduated. he'd always known that he wanted to be an architect, practically. He grew up in Hiawatha, and he had an uncle who was a builder, brought him some building plans when he was 5. So here's a guy who grew up here in Kansas. He grew up in Lawrence, went to KU, a rich, modern architectural education. He had a lot of chances with houses, which is something that a young architect can get, probably not yet very big buildings. Although he worked for the state architect and after a couple of years got his license, so he had been a licensed architect for 3 or 4 years at least before he left. But I think this house shows a kind of sophistication and understanding of how to manipulate and design space and select materials and make it work for a small family at a fairly low budget. And look how well it's held together, I think, too. If we were talking about not being able to see too many of these nail marks, even. You can find them a little bit, but I remember when we put it up, you had to put the nail deep into the panel, and then you filled it, and then you sanded it, and then, you know, but in some cases it's remarkably unnoticeable how this comes together. And it was supposed to be sleek, clean, fresh looking. I think it still remains that way, and I think it's wonderful that what you, Doug, you and Alice have done to make this work and to keep this beautiful. And one of my favorite spaces is back there, you know, at the shower. And I can just imagine working back there. So I think the outside is
that sanctuary. That was his house too. Huh. It seems bigger than it really is.